Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Kiln Restaking Rendez-Vous. I'm Edgar, protocol specialist at Kiln, and today we have Altan from the NEAR Foundation to talk about the NEAR Fast Finality AVS. Altan, how are you doing today?
Good, man. How about yourself?
Great. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. To start this off, can you introduce yourself first? Can you give the background story and how did you start working in blockchain?
Yeah. So I'm Altan. Grew up in Turkey, actually. Left Turkey when I was 18. Studied computer science and math in the US, and then came to London in 2020 during this crisis that everybody remembers, to study pretty much AI. So I did my master's in AI at Imperial College London, and the things I've focused on and always focused on has been simulation. So worked in virtual reality before, and then ended up researching how to train a deep learning model in simulation and how to transfer that into the real world without training in the real world. So I has been sort of have interest in kind of simulation, but crypto has never been there, right? So it's always been like software, even hardware, if you think about robotics. And ended up in 2021, I was working in this VC called Antler, got really interested in sort of this Web3 own everything stack. Right? How do you? I always believe that everybody should own everything in online, and that pulled me into crypto and studying first studying Ethereum, which now we're getting more aligned with, to just landed on NEAR. Particularly, I was really interested in sharding as a way to scale blockchains. But also, I was pretty impressed by Ilya's background in AI as one of the authors of Attention is All You Need. So did that, and then arrived in sort of November 2022, did this hackathon in NEARCon, which is NEAR's sort of a conference in Lisbon, and ended up winning that hackathon. And a couple of folks at the foundation reached out to me saying, hey, we need someone technical that can program and code, but is not just technical, right? Does more of sales engineering, partner engineering, where help partners code, but also explain NEAR stack in simple terms. I joined foundation in that time, and been working with the foundation for almost a year and a half now, and where I ended up sort of going to this NEAR modular thesis is, we were sitting in sort of in August 2022, we looked and said, hey, what's the best use case for NEAR's technology to bring into rollups, which at that time, Base just launched in L2. We were doing a study on Base internally and said, hey, DA is the first thing to do, right? DA is very simple. We've already built a very robust data availability solution for sharding. Why don't we take that and then apply it to rollups? And then the second product is, we have fast finality in NEAR, which is called Doomslug, and we sort of can we bring that to rollups? And the best way to do that is through EigenLayer, where you get some of the security, and then sort of help Ethereum rollups to settle between them pretty fast. So that's what the two products we have is NEAR DA, and then obviously the fast finality layer that uses NEAR DA as some sort of a module as a data availability solution to have that data available for operators to take the data and do something with it. But yeah, it gives you sort of my story and a bit of how we came to build the products that we're building for rollups.
Great. Let's talk a bit about finality for a second, because a lot of our listeners, I'm sure, are users of rollups, but they don't necessarily understand why finality, and especially fast finality, is important for rollups. And maybe you can talk about why it's important for specific types of rollup versus others.
Yeah. So for example, when you're doing when you're trying to withdraw your ETH or in an exchange, right? So let's start with an exchange even, and then go back down. exchanges actually have to wait like almost 64 to 90 slots for Ethereum to finalize, which is around like 12 minutes to give you your whatever Ethereum, right, on L2s. A lot of exchanges actually don't do that. So if you look at the graph, right, like Binance does it, but there's a lot of exchanges that are below that 64 slot. So basically they give you your whatever money without even Ethereum finalizing, right? So they have to kind of like do this very complex logic for Ethereum for you to withdraw and deposit your ETH or any other tokens that you're trying to do. The other thing is when you're bridging, actually, so if you want to bridge from another L2 to another L2, the problem with that is for, let's say, rollup A and rollup B, for rollup B to take action on rollup A's anything, right? So they have to wait on 12 minutes to take that rollup A state. And the problems with that, if you think about it, is, well, you know, Altan wants to move. Altan is on GMX. Let's say I longed this token. I made some money. Now I want to go to OP. I have to wait 12 minutes, right? And that's quite tough from the user's perspective. And what we do with the finality layer is, let's just get rid of that 12 minutes. I mean, that's like the Ethereum's finalization. For sure, the transactions will finalize there at some point. Well, let's create this another layer where whenever that something happens on rollup A, that layer sees it and then gives that to the rollup B. So in 3 to 4 seconds, rollup B, any application, let's say, is aware that this happened on rollup A, and it's finalized by some Ethereum security from EigenLayer. So I feel confident that I should be doing this action, right? So the trust model obviously believes on the EigenLayer's trust security model, but it gives you this like very sleek user experience that you can design. And that, for example, I give this example of Uniswap, right? Like when you go to Uniswap, you still have to do like, oh, you can only do swaps on Optimism, Arbitrum, whatever, right? But imagine you should be able to do Optimism to Arbitrum ETH or something. So that's kind of, yeah, from the problems perspective and how we're thinking about the solution itself.
So if multiple rollups would share the same finality layer, interoperability would be much easier in the space.
Yes, but the thing is, like, the beauty of finality layer is currently they don't have to post their data to anywhere. So they end up like doing their own stuff to Ethereum, whatever. This is another sort of like a sidecar product that basically there's this relayer that looks at the sequencer and says, hey, these are the order of transactions. The relayer takes that data, dumps it to NearDA, but it could be just in practice, it could be any data availability layer. It's just for us that NearDA is quite fast, right? 2-3 seconds to finalize. And then when that's finalized, an EigenLayer operator basically takes that data and then runs a full node of, let's say, Arbitrum, right? And it's aware that the Arbitrum state is at the point that it should be. And then gives, as an API, like using an API, gives it to an application that can take that and push it to, let's say, Optimism, right? And then they have sort of like seen the state of ARB already into like in a very short amount of time.
Gotcha. And going back a bit, and you already explained a bit the origin story of Near Modular. My question is, why did you try to build AVSs with Ethereum economic security when you already have like the Near ecosystem with like a lot of capital there? Why not use just economic security from Near, and but still service rollups for other ecosystem?
No, that's a very good question. So for the first product, NearDA actually uses Near's consensus, which relies on Near security. So Near security is around, like, obviously depends on the time that we're looking at the security. If we looked at it 3 days ago, it was like, 7 billion market cap. Today it was like yesterday it was 5 billion. Now it's 6 billion market cap, right? So it uses the staker. So like stake Near is around 50 to 60% of Near. So roughly around like 34 billion security. But for rollups to sort of like, the first way we started with EigenLayer security is because rollups actually, since they like settle on Ethereum and since they finalize on Ethereum, they prefer to have some sort of Ethereum security. The product can actually be improved way better if you have this dual staking sort of model where actually Shurram has been talked about quite often these days, where you have two tokens that secure a network, right? So one is probably EigenLayer, and then for the finality layer later, we're actually thinking about another token that either near token or something else that people can stake and give us like plus EigenLayer plus near security. So which gives more confidence to developers and then the users as well. Yeah, we're thinking about how to like the security model could change over time, and it could be improved.
And did you always have this in mind, or like did you like just meet EigenLayer and then the idea popped into your head? Like how was the origin of building an EigenLayer AVS?
Yeah, so we met Shurram, I think, in August, and Shurram had this idea. Well, you guys have very fast finality. Like, why don't we build something for rollups? This is something I want in the market. So we've started building like just by basically talking to Shurram about it, and hey, like this is interesting, and we're building these products that are almost becoming like a near modular team. But then the dual staking actually came through a lot of folks that were like mentioning to me, oh, why don't you use like the near security as well? And, sometimes like when you're building something, it's also nice to listen to people. Like you obviously have your own ideas, but building on and just basically in a rabbit hole doesn't help, because like market usually tells you what they want to see. So the dual staking model is definitely something that like every person that we meet is like, oh, maybe you guys should do this. And we're like, yeah, that's interesting. We haven't baked into the design yet, but it's something definitely in the works.
Cool. And there are other finality products building in the AVS space. Can you talk a bit about what's your vision for fast finality as a whole? Do you think it's a winner takes most market? Do you think it's there are like different trade-offs, and so that there are different basically options to be picked for every rollup? How do you feel like this competition will play out?
Yeah, so traditionally we did a lot of cross-chain, almost like transactions using bridges. Obviously, if you lived through the era of 2020 to 2022, you know how painful bridges can get, right? So there was a lot of hacks the Ronin hack was there. Second, there was the wormhole hack. So there's this sort of like security issues. Like there's always security issues with bridges. But now we get, in this year, like we get EigenLayer security, and we'll see a lot of folks that are like, we'll try to do the same things, right? Like with, there's two ways to do this, right? Which is like cryptoeconomic security, which what we're doing pretty much. And there's also the way to do like cryptographic security, where you do proof aggregation, right? Like that's what EigenLayer tries to do. We believe like in the short term, cryptoeconomic security is the way to go, because there's already a lot of availability in cryptoeconomic security, and it's not as expensive as running a prover today, right? So if you're running a prover, for example, my estimation to run a Polygon CDK rollup, for example, is like $250K per year just from the prover itself. There's some teams that can afford that. There's some teams that can't afford that, right? So I believe the short term is cryptoeconomic, with long term being the cryptographic. Now, if we say like, how do we win in this market? There's obviously the brand value that a lot of people trust a product, an AVS that's built by Near. I've been hearing that from a lot of folks, and I'm thinking also from a perspective of like, if you're actually operating right, like first maybe you get your tokens through emissions, but if this product goes well and it becomes like almost like bridges, you're actually getting a lot of revenue, right? So if you've staked, let's say restaked ETH, your basically yields might come from transaction fees. And that's quite exciting, because And that's how I see the AVS market to play out, because there will be a lot of AVSs in the bull market, and we're already starting to see that. But I think bear market, not so much, right? Because in the bear market, some of them will be like, well, we're not making money here, so I can't pay anymore, right? I can't pay. And then operators will also just say, hey, this doesn't look right? I'm just going to opt into another product. So that's what I'm thinking. And the plus sort of benefit of our finality layer is that there's a couple of near rollups that will use this, right? They're basically using near DA, and it's bundled as the same product, right? So you can, and we'll work with these teams to integrate and like ideate, and then like offer our engineering services to kind of build these cross-chain applications. Yeah, so that's why we're thinking like how the AVS markets and this one market will evolve.
Super interesting. And EigenLayer is basically like a marketplace for economic security to secure protocols that need a formal consensus. My question to basically all AVSs is, how much economic security do you need?
This depends, right? I think like we start with very small, like we've just announced as well, partnership, which they're willing to give us like 500 million security. But I think security is meme, right? Like if everybody can just like, all these like LRTs be like, I'm just giving you $1 billion worth of, economic security. In our case, we need economic security for the number that we're transferring over time, right? So for us, let's say if we're using optimistic rollups, and if the application is like transferring 500 million, we need at least 2x of that, right, over that period. So in that case, like it's kind of nice to start with $1 billion, right? Just to ensure that people are so comfortable, and let people move over, I don't know, like 20 million, 10 million, like small amounts, and then build up over time, because you're actually like transferring money, not some game. But that's why I think like for games and all the other ones, economic security doesn't really matter. They can just like do deposit withdrawals, and security model is not like that important. But for rollups that want to do like for applications that want to do cross-chain transactions, I think it's very important that number.
Makes sense. Do you have views already about like how you envision shared security, pooled security versus attributed security? Like, do you feel like you will likely ask the market for like, let's say, a dedicated 100 million of value to be attributed only to the Fast Finality AVS?
Yeah, so this is currently like, this depends on the traction when we go live, right? So currently we're testing the software. We're not live on the mainnet. So this will like, I think we'll work with like LRTs and say, hey, like this is the economic security we need, right? Because the problem currently is, if you're getting $1 billion restaked ETH, you actually need to be paying 50 basis points, right? So that means, 5 million, if my math is correct, right? Paid back almost to the restakers. It's okay to start doing that just to make everybody comfortable, but it's not a sustainable model, right? So eventually, I think the sort of the yield paid back to restakers will be measured by basically by how much you can pay back, right? So eventually we'll just ask these folks, be like, hey, I don't think it makes sense to get 500 million, but let's go for 100 million. And we know that the revenue is coming like substantial, and it is sustainable because XYZ. So that's why like I see the market being a lot of restaked ETH going to a bunch of AVSs, and then eventually will fade out because there will be more options too. So your job as an AVS is to, I think, and a lot of people will not agree with me, then don't talk about it, is to generate revenue of some sort. Because if you're not generating revenue, you're like, your restake ETH might fly somewhere else.
Yeah, we'll talk about incentives a bit later. But for now, I'd like to ask you some questions about timelines. Can you talk a bit about like the the steps that you're currently like following, and like could you give us a bit of a hint towards like what would be the mainnet launch for your AVS?
Yeah, we were thinking about mainnet launch in Q2, Q3. Haven't decided a date yet. So testnet, like operators will be testing the software in testnet this week. We might actually go faster. It depends on traction, right? Depends on who wants to use it. But we're aware that whenever we go to mainnet, we'll be paying back, right? So I would say, right, like Q3 is a good target to have. But you know, it's like operators testing it and starting to ensure that everything is secure by this quarter.
That's clear. And so how many like customers / rollups do you expect to have at launch? And do you want to have like kind of like a minimum to make sure that you can pay the restakers, or how do you basically how are you guys doing on the BD front?
Yeah, so currently there was no dedicated BD. So we've been pretty much working on the product. We've actually just started working with a couple of folks, like some ecosystems, for example. Let's say an L2 ecosystem, we're basically might like just commit and say, hey, we'll be using sort of the finality layer to do cross rollup transactions. All the near DA customers will get it just by default, right? Like this. So any applications that want to use this, like we'll do it. But I think the target audience that we'll go for, and that's why I think mainnet launch doesn't make sense in Q2, is like applications that are, for example, like Uniswap, that want to do cross-chain transactions, and it makes sense for them to do 3-4 seconds for the user, right? It could be, for that reason, DEXs are a good target to have. Also, like any like lending protocols, like Aave, all of those would be great. Just to highlight, our team is 4 people currently, so we'll expand it over time, right? It's like 2 VD to engineering, because we've been incubated by Near, like, but that will change very soon. So we're thinking that like I think Q3 is a good time to kind of like launch with partners in some way.
Great. And now let's talk a bit about incentives, because I think at the end of the day, in EigenLayer, economic security is not very hard to get. Like most AVSs, I expect will get more economic security than they actually need. And then my question is like, how do you guys plan on incentivizing that economic security to stay? How do you plan on incentivizing operators and restakers to run the AVS in the long run?
Yeah, so this is a good question. So in the beginning, it's easy. I think we can pay the 50 basis points. In the future, what's going to happen is, again, like we'll work with everyone to get more cross-chain transactions, right? It could be even, I say apps, but it could be some like wealth manager that has, I don't know, like I have 50 million to move around between L2s, and I'll use your protocol to move money around. And we won't charge as much as, like, the benefit of this is we won't charge as much as Wormhole. Wormhole doesn't do any of like Ethereum L2s, kind of does, but mainly like L1s. But so we won't charge as much as them, but we will work on a model where we know like L2s will transfer a lot of value across the way. Maybe we can do something like a portal Wormhole ourselves, right? Like to kind of generate that. But yeah, the main focus after sort of like finalizing everything, like testing, pretty much will be on like how to generate sustainable revenue. And that will, I think, help us to, again, what I said before is to, because there's a bull market, but survive the bear too. I think like a good product designer should be thinking already about the bear market, because bull market's fat, like, you know, they go up now. And so I think incentives would be like in the beginning, like giving maybe Near tokens to the restakers and operators, but eventually, you know, maybe some more incentives, which we haven't sort of like kind of publicly committed, but eventually taking all those and building those cross-chain transactions as we speak.
Interesting. And so yeah, like you talked a bit about like the form that those incentives could take. We're starting to see some AVS launch with point system, and I think what basically they are saying is that ultimately, like when they have their TGE, it will likely be emissions. Do you plan to have a dedicated token for this AVS, or are you working with like the financial internally to have some emission of NEAR allocated to AVS restakers? How does that work?
So at the beginning, I think it would be NEAR tokens. In the future, maybe there might be something else. Hopefully, we can share that pretty soon. But yes, so the incentive would be that like if you let's say stake this, right? So you get some emissions plus some of the revenue from the protocol itself. And I really love that sort of what Uniswap did is to like 20 to 30%. I think it's like 30% back to stakers, right? So and that grows the sort of crypto economic security, but also it gives something back, which a lot of like some protocols like obviously give it back from emissions, but this would come from like fee revenue, which excites me a lot.
Great. And now let's talk a bit about how it is to be an operator in the space. Kiln will likely be an operator of the NEAR AVS. What are the operator requirements? How heavy or light is it to be a participant in the NEAR AVS?
Yeah, so we did some math pretty much like running so you would be running full nodes of rollups. So depending on like, we'll probably start with like the bigger L2s just because it's just easier, right? Like we know there's more volume there. If you do the math, so let's say like running it, for example, on average, running a node is, I think it's $1 per minute or something. And then we've done the math, but it won't cost you as much as like running, let's say having one engineer, right? So like that works on the team. So I would assume that it's going to cost an operator like plus one engineer or something to run the nodes yearly, right? So, and that's like the stretch. Like if we end up running like a bunch of full nodes, ideally we can improve the design, right? So full nodes aren't great. It's great to start with full nodes. We should be thinking probably how we should do light nodes because light nodes are way cheaper. But for that, we probably need some zero knowledge, which again, it costs us. Actually, people talk about light nodes as cheap, but actually, like light nodes are pretty expensive on the ZK side. So there's a balance there, right? How do you sort of like prove? How do you prove a state? Eventually, that's why I think it makes sense to go to zero knowledge, but not as of today. But yeah, overall TLDR is that like it should cost you max one engineer, but I don't think it's gonna be like that for a while.
Okay, yeah, and that's really if we stretch it out and you guys like support like many rollups. Would you have also like a way for operators to do like specific rollups? And do you also maybe plan to fragment your AVS in saying like this is the finality AVS for this rollup, this is the finality AVS for this rollup, kind of like what AltLayer is doing with Mac.
Yeah, we can do that. So what we can do is, I mean, there's like a bunch of operators, right? They aggregate, so they basically put a attestation saying, hey, this is the state I found. You can actually have a bunch of nodes that are doing like OP, a bunch of nodes that are doing ARB, a bunch of nodes that are doing something else, and then within those like nodes that will go, and then eventually will go to the aggregator. Again, right? If you have a lot of operators, that's easy to do. If you don't have a lot of operators, that's not great so much, right? So the goal is to be better than sort of like 14 guardians or 16 guardians for wormhole. But yeah, it's eventually the more revenue, or it will make the system will actually grow itself. yeah, I think it's an interesting sort of design choice that you make, right? At the beginning, it's everybody will be running it because you don't have that many operators. If EigenLayer grows, and again, that's the bet everybody makes, right? Then it's easier to kind of agree that there's going to be a lot of operators that will join the network.
Yeah, definitely. And my follow-up question is, do you plan basically like to have this active set of operators to be like pretty much permissionless, or will you have like a minimum of TVL at the beginning? Like for example, we're seeing EigenD that requires operators to have a minimum of 320 ETH to opt into their AVS. How do you plan to do that?
We haven't thought about that yet, but it makes sense from an EigenDA perspective, that because they'll have immediately some like customers that would want to use that EigenDA in the mainnet. So for us, this depends on how much volume we expect from transactions itself, right? Like if there's a lot, yes, we'll increase it over time. The problem with 320 ETH is that actually becomes very centralized as a DA solution. You don't want that to happen. You actually want smaller and smaller, like sort of operators to attest, and then kind of gets, they all get like attestations. But again, the availability of capital is like, there's a lot of big sort of operators too, right? So kind of want to start from them and then go down the list, just to ensure. But you want to maintain a good number, at least to say that the system is decentralized. Just, like near is probably like 200 validators, right? Like obviously 200 operators is very hard to get to. It's not going to happen for a while, but like you have 5 to 10 operators to start. This is probably good.
Mm. Yeah, and about decentralization, like, do you feel like since there will pretty much only be a small number of operators that will be able to run a lot of AVSs, do you see this as a centralization risk? Because like maybe like one operator will be able to run a near fast finality, but will not be able to opt into EigenDA or some other AVS that is more restrictive with its active set. Do you see that as a risk in the long run?
Yeah, I mean, in the short term, I mean, there's not even slashing, right? So if you think about it, like there's a lot of trust that you give to EigenLayer. I mean, all of us trust EigenLayer in some case. But in the future, I think like, I honestly think the market will settle itself. Yeah, and the invisible hand, like from Adam Smith, right? It's very old book, but still kind of will figure it out itself, right? I mean, there's going to be, I agree, there's going to be some AVSs that are like, oh, well, I don't want to run this thing because the APY comes from like some weird stuff. Not that like it's here yet, but the market will get very saturated. Eventually those will be flushed out, right? Be like, hey, and I think that's kind of like entry to the bear. You're going to see a lot of these kind of like flush out. And the ones that sustain will go through another sort of cycle, right? So that's how I see it. I think there's a centralization risk in staking and everything, right? If you think about like, for example, you guys, right? You guys run a bunch of different stakers as well, right? Like I guess like probably not Near, probably run Solana, probably run any of these. I'm not worried about the operator side because they are more like, as long as there's the incentives, right? There's incentives in emissions and stuff. But eventually, like Kiln would say, even to let's say some ex AVS be like, I don't know, man, I'm not going to run this anymore. So you can just pull out. Eventually, maybe you end up running like 2, 3 because you trust. And there's like a couple that will run like 10. So the market will like sort of resolve itself, right? Because it's a new primitive, and just like everything in crypto, 2017 we didn't know what to do with this stuff, right? Like now there's more exciting stuff going on. So that's how I see it.
Great. And if we kind of zoom out now and we look at kind of restaking it as a whole, like what's your long-term vision for how the EigenLayer ecosystem will evolve? What kind of AVSs would you like to see in the future, or you think we'll see?
Yeah, so from our perspective, I really like this idea and vision for I also expressed this in my Twitter as well. Like I see EigenLayer as a way to extend some great features of near or other L1s and bring that to Ethereum, right? So it is this like intersection between like for us, it's like sharding, fast finality, cheap transactions, you know, all of that. And I mean, even think about this as kind of like intersection group, right? And then you have like EigenLayer as like flexibility, Ethereum security. And then I want to be building in the intersection where I take great stuff from near or another blockchain, right? And then bring that to the Ethereum ecosystem, right? I mean, today that's for us is obviously like fast finality. Obviously DAs almost like it's possible to do DA as well. It's just that we've never thought about how you would do this with EigenLayer. But also I would think about more like if, let's say, something that's Ilya's pushing through on AI, that's basically something makes sense for people, right? I also have an AI background. I would push that, right? So like, how do we build these sort of AVS, a couple of AVSs in the market that are using the superpowers of near, but benefits others.
Super cool. And so, and what do you think about restaking as a whole, like, and competitors of EigenLayer? Like we've seen recently, some competitors announce raises. So we now know that there will be competition on the restaking market. Technically, like restaking was kind of started by the Cosmos hub. So it's not, there was never like only one actor. Like, do you think there is room for more than one restaking hub?
I think so. Yeah, just like any market. I think it's also healthy for the market to have different restaking options. You know, it's always gives people better service. It will give everybody better security. I see, like I've been seeing sort of start to see Bitcoin restaking. I'm not sure how that would work because like you don't stake Bitcoin, right? We kind of like the idea that you would think is like you send an address, you would lock it, and then there's a lot of trust assumptions. Maybe you build like decentralized nodes on top of that locked address. But I see that over time, there will be, there's going to be, just like every market, I see this market as like maybe one or two players. I don't see it as like 100 players because there's this trust assumption, and like the more EigenLayer succeeds, the bit easier for everyone to come into EigenLayer and say, hey, I'm going to restake from there. But if there's some smart people that come in and have a better approach than EigenLayer, they will also capture market share, just like operating systems, right? Pretty much. I mean, you've started with, I guess, you have the main two, which is kind of like the Windows and Linux, right? They have different approaches. Obviously, Mac uses the kind of Linux-based operating system, right? So I think we'll see that like 2, 3. And then depends on like how we end up with this bull market, right? I mean, you know, you never know in crypto where something happens in security issue and everybody's perception of something changes. Which makes crypto an interesting place.
Absolutely. And my last question is, like Near is launching AVSs, and in that, it kind of is aligning itself more with Ethereum. This is a very interesting move from what we call vulgarly an alt layer one when we talk about ETH competitors. Do you feel like other alt layer ones will take the same path and try to provide value for the modular space in Ethereum?
Yeah, so we have an interesting positioning here because actually our founders, Ilya and Alex, they wanted to build sharding for Ethereum back in the day. They actually have governance forums and they were contributing to governance. It turns out like they wanted to build a sharded blockchain, but then when they were thinking about it, like it was really hard to pass through the governance forums in Ethereum, right? So they kind of were like, yeah, it's actually more beneficial for us to kind of build a sharded blockchain ourselves, not like basically busting, sort of like going through all these governance stuff and like waiting to build, right? So We have that unique positioning. A lot of sort of when Near came in, a lot of folks were saying that, oh, Near is like Ethereum 2.0 sort of actualized. So we have that sort of historical relationship, and we still keep we kept a lot of sort of very friendly to Ethereum folks from over the years. So it was kind of easier for us to go and say, hey, we're actually doing DA, we're actually doing this. I don't not from the new generation L1s. I expect to this extent, but I already started seeing some of the parallelized EVMs having their own stacks, because I know that Say has its own parallelized VM stack. So I see that happen, but not to the certain degree. I'm pretty sure there will be some older generation L1s that will come and try to build an AVS. I wouldn't surprise me, but I don't think that's Solana, right? I don't think that's Solana folks are going to do that. They have a very different sort of approach to the world in terms of how they think about decentralization. So yeah, that's how I see the market play out.
Great. Well, Altan, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for coming on the podcast. Where can we send people to learn more about the Finality AVS? Where can we follow you on Twitter, maybe?
Yeah, my Twitter is Mr. Altan Tutar. It's pretty basic. Just add Mr. in the beginning. So there's this documentation on Super Fast Finality Layer. It is not fully live, but I can send it to you folks, how that would work. And then you can go nearmodular.com, also the data about DA. It is prior EIP 4844 and how it's cheaper, it was cheaper compared to Ethereum. So that data will change, because we still haven't collected full enough data after EIP 4844 to be able to say, hey, Near Day is this much cheaper. And then those are the main sort of three kind of documents that is useful.
Amazing. Perfect. Well, to the audience, we'll see you on the next podcast. And again, Altan, was great to chat with you.
Thanks, Edgar.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.